I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. It was a typical Friday morning when Claire casually mentioned her plans for the evening. "I'll be out tonight after work, probably staying over with friends," she said with a tone that felt oddly rehearsed. Claire wasn't usually one for impromptu outings, especially not ones that extended overnight. I had always trusted her implicitly, so I brushed it off with a nod, though something inside me hesitated. As I left for work, I told myself I was overthinking. After all, why would she lie? But as the day dragged on, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling. Our marriage had always been straightforward, our routines predictable, and Claire wasn't one for spontaneous plans. And yet, here I was, replaying her words from this morning. What was I so bothered by? She was my wife, the person I shared everything with. There was no reason to doubt her, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. When I returned home that evening, I found myself alone, as expected. The house felt unusually quiet, almost like it was holding its breath. I glanced at the clock, realizing she would be out for hours yet. I threw together a quick dinner, feeling an odd emptiness as I ate alone. The evening crept on, and by the time I climbed into bed, my phone was void of any messages from her. I could barely sleep, with questions swirling in my mind. What was I so paranoid about? I knew my wife. But a small voice in the back of my head whispered, "Do you?" The weekend came and went without incident, but I started noticing small, subtle changes in her behavior. Claire's late nights became more frequent. She laughed off my questions with vague explanations, and her phone was always silent now, vibrating occasionally with notifications that she would ignore until I wasn't around. She seemed distracted, almost distant, like she was living in a world just slightly out of reach. By Wednesday, I couldn't ignore it any longer. It felt like there was something lurking just beneath the surface. I tried bringing it up casually over dinner. "You've been out a lot lately," I said, hoping she'd brush it off, give me a reason to let go of the worry gnawing at me. She shrugged, giving me an easy smile. "Work's been intense. A few of us have been going out to blow off some steam." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and vanished into the bedroom, her smile as bright as ever. But it felt off, like it didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, as I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, I could feel my trust slipping, and it terrified me. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband, but I also didn't want to ignore what my gut was screaming at me. I thought of all the times we'd shared, the honesty we'd built our relationship on, and reminded myself that one strange week didn't erase that. But then, I found the receipt. It was tucked away in the pocket of her jacket, crumpled but legible. It was from a restaurant I'd never heard her mention. In fact, it wasn't even local, it was in the next city over. And it wasn't an ordinary place, it was the sort of high-end restaurant we only went to on special occasions. I stood there holding it, feeling my chest tighten. She hadn't mentioned this, hadn't said a word about a fancy dinner with friends. Questions flooded my mind, and I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Could I really confront her? Could I demand to know where she'd been and with whom? What if she had a perfectly reasonable explanation? I didn't want to push her away with baseless accusations. And yet, I couldn't just sit back and ignore what was becoming clearer with each passing day. By the time Friday rolled around, I was more anxious than I cared to admit. The nagging questions had only grown louder, filling every quiet moment. That evening, as she was getting ready to go out, I tried to keep my tone casual. "Where are you headed tonight?" I asked, hoping my voice didn't betray the suspicion creeping into my mind. "Oh, just out with the same work crew," she replied, without even looking up from her phone. She was slipping on her shoes, her eyes fixed on the screen as her fingers typed quickly, too absorbed to notice the edge in my voice. "Anyone I know?" I ventured, hoping to gain some ground. She paused, barely glancing up. "Just a few people from the office. You wouldn't know them." I watched as she grabbed her purse, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and slipped out the door. The silence that filled the house was deafening, and for the first time, I felt an overwhelming wave of doubt. That night, I decided it was time to take action. I hated the thought of it, hated even more that my mind was going down this road, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I pulled out my laptop, did some research, and installed a tracking app on her phone. I reasoned with myself that it was just to ease my worries, to prove to myself that she was exactly where she said she was. Sunday came, and she announced that she'd be heading out for a business trip the following day. She seemed tense as she explained that she'd be gone for a couple of days, meeting clients in another city. "I'll be back by Tuesday evening," she said, trying to sound casual, but her tone felt forced. My stomach churned, but I played along, giving her a nod and a smile as if everything was normal. Little did she know, I'd be tracking her every move. As she left Monday morning, I watched her drive off, a sense of finality settling over me. I knew this was it. One way or another, I'd find out the truth. With a deep breath, I opened the tracking app and waited for her location to appear. I watched as her dot moved across the screen, farther and farther from our town, my heart pounding with every mile she put between us. Hours passed, and as I followed her route, I grew more anxious. She was nowhere near the city she claimed to be visiting. Instead, her dot was hovering in a quiet residential neighborhood in a neighboring city. My chest tightened as the pieces fell into place, the suspicions that had haunted me for days finally coming to a head. She wasn't on a business trip. She was somewhere else, doing something, or someone, she couldn't tell me about. I stared at the screen, watching the dot stay put as anger and heartbreak welled up inside me. I couldn't stop staring at the screen, watching as her location remained steady in that quiet residential area. The reality of what I was seeing sank in like cold water, and for a long time, I just sat there, numb. It felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, not my own. How could she betray me like this? The hours stretched on, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd never imagined being in this position, feeling utterly powerless, waiting for answers that no one was going to give me. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her laughing, maybe even holding someone else's hand, feeling no shame, no remorse for what she was doing to me. When Claire finally returned on Tuesday night, I was waiting. I hadn't planned what I was going to say or even how I was going to confront her. My mind had been spinning for days, the anger mixing with sadness and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but somehow, I managed to keep my composure. She walked through the door with a casual smile. "Hey," she greeted me, dropping her bag by the door. "How was your weekend?" My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Fine. Yours?" She paused, sensing something in my tone, but brushed it off quickly. "It was good. Long, though." She looked away, avoiding eye contact, and that was all I needed to confirm that she was hiding something. I decided to play it cool, to gather more information before revealing what I knew. I didn't want to go in half-cocked, accusing her without solid proof. If she was cheating, I wanted to hear it from her own lips. But as the days passed, her suspicious behavior continued, each moment eating away at the life we had built together. One evening, about a week later, she told me she was going out with friends again. I nodded, watching as she got ready, taking longer than usual, applying more makeup than she usually did. As she slipped on a dress I hadn't seen in years, a pang of jealousy and anger surged through me. She was dressing up for someone, and it wasn't me. The minute she left, I picked up her phone, which she had forgotten in her hurry to leave. I didn't want to snoop, didn't want to go down this path, but I couldn't ignore the need to know the truth. I unlocked her phone, scrolling through her messages and social media, but everything seemed normal. She hadn't left a single trace, which only made me more suspicious. Claire wasn't the type to leave her phone behind, especially if she was hiding something. Desperate for answers, I opened her photos, scrolling through her recent images. And there it was, pictures of her in that same dress, standing with a man I'd never seen before. They were at a bar, smiling, looking far too close for comfort. My heart sank as I scrolled through the photos, each one hitting me like a physical blow. She looked happy, relaxed, like she had no care in the world. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was my wife, the woman I had trusted with my life. But she had been lying to me, building a life behind my back with someone else. My mind raced, thinking of all the times she'd been working late or going out with friends. How many of those nights had been with him? The anger surged, stronger than before, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more information, more proof. If I went to her with only photos, she'd find a way to talk her way out of it. She'd make me feel like I was overreacting, like I was crazy. I wasn't going to let her do that. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding the truth. I tracked her movements, piecing together her lies, and each discovery felt like a dagger to the heart. She was seeing him regularly, every time she claimed she was out with friends or on a business trip. It became painfully clear that our life together had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion that she had built to cover up her affair. Then, on one of her supposed work trips, she left the house with her overnight bag and another excuse about a client meeting in the next town over. I watched her drive off, my heart pounding as I prepared to follow her. I couldn't sit back anymore, watching her lies unfold on a screen. I needed to see it for myself, to confront her in the act. Keeping a safe distance, I followed her car through winding roads and highways until we reached the next town. She parked outside a small cafe, glancing around before heading inside. I watched from a distance, feeling like a character in a movie, the betrayed husband spying on his unfaithful wife. It felt surreal, a twisted version of the life I had once thought was perfect. Moments later, a man walked in and joined her. He was tall, dark-haired, with a confident smile that made my blood boil. They greeted each other with an embrace, her arms wrapping around him in a way she hadn't embraced me in months. They sat close, whispering, laughing, completely oblivious to the world around them. I forced myself to stay calm, to watch and observe. Confronting her now would only give her an excuse to lie, to twist the truth into something that suited her. No, I needed to be patient, to wait for the right moment. I took a few photos, documenting everything. I would confront her, but on my own terms, with all the evidence I needed. I drove back home, my mind reeling, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Every mile felt like a reminder of the betrayal, of the life that had crumbled in front of me. By the time I reached our house, I was filled with a cold, calculating rage. I was done being the unsuspecting husband, the fool who had been played. In the days that followed, I prepared myself. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, the texts, the photos, the receipts she'd carelessly left behind. I wanted her to see, to understand the extent of her lies. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to make sure she knew that I had seen through her deceit. Finally, the day came. She walked through the door, her usual smile replaced by a look of exhaustion. She dropped her bag by the door, looking up to find me waiting for her in the kitchen. She looked up at me, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to be home, let alone standing there waiting. There was a long silence as we stared at each other. For a moment, I almost faltered, almost gave in to the years of shared memories, the laughter, and the life we had built together. But the images of her with him were seared into my mind, a reminder of the betrayal I could never forgive. I kept my voice steady. "We need to talk, Claire." She hesitated, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape. "Okay," she tried to give me that casual, dismissive look that had worked so well in the past, but I could see the faint tremor in her hands as she put her bag down. "About what?" she added, feigning innocence. I held up her phone, which I had placed on the counter beside me, displaying the photos I had found earlier. Her face paled, and she took a step back, her eyes widening as she recognized the evidence. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could say anything. "Don't bother," I said coldly. "I know everything, Claire." Her face fell, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw genuine regret flicker in her eyes. But the feeling was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of defiance. "So you went through my phone? That's a violation of privacy, you know." I let out a bitter laugh, unable to believe she was trying to play the victim. "Privacy? Are you serious? After everything you've done, you're going to talk to me about privacy?" She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You don't understand. It's complicated. There were things I couldn't tell you." "Couldn't tell me?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, Claire. Going behind my back, pretending to be someone you're not. And you have the nerve to stand there and tell me I don't understand?" She clenched her jaw, looking down at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said, the sarcasm heavy in my voice. "Because you did hurt me. More than you can imagine." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, it looked like she might break down. But then her eyes met mine, cold and unyielding. "Maybe if you'd been more present, if you'd shown me some real attention, things wouldn't have turned out this way." The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. "Don't you dare try to put this on me, Claire. Don't you dare act like this is somehow my fault. Think about it," she snapped, her voice sharp and bitter. "You're always working late, always wrapped up in your own world. Do you even know the last time you asked me how I felt? How I was doing? You act like everything's perfect, like you're this wonderful husband, but you don't see me. Not really." I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my composure. "I trusted you, Claire. I trusted that if something was wrong, you would talk to me about it, not run off with someone else." Her expression softened, but it was too little, too late. "I tried to, but you wouldn't have understood. You never understand." The word stung, cutting deeper than I expected. Maybe there had been problems, cracks in the foundation of our marriage that I hadn't noticed. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could justify the lies, the deceit, the way she had used my trust against me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of receipts, placing them on the counter between us. "You think I don't understand? I understand perfectly. I understand that you were living a double life, lying to me while you played house with someone else." She looked down at the receipts, her face pale, her bravado gone. "Where did you get those?" she whispered. "I've been keeping track, Claire," I said, my voice flat. "I've been watching you for weeks, piecing together every lie, every excuse. Did you really think you could get away with it forever?" Her hands shook as she reached out to touch the receipts, but she pulled back, as if the evidence was too painful to confront. "I don't know what you want me to say," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want your apologies," I replied, my tone icy. "I just want the truth." She stared at me, her expression a mixture of guilt and fear. It started as just a friendship," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go any further, but I don't know. I felt alive with him, like he saw me in a way you never did." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to hear how she justified her actions. "You don't get to blame me for this. You made a choice, Claire. You made a choice to betray me." She fell silent, her eyes downcast, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be sorry. But then she looked up at me, her gaze hardened. "And what do you plan to do about it?" The question hung heavy in the air. I could feel the rage boiling beneath the surface, a fire that had been simmering for weeks. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think clearly. I had spent too long letting her control the narrative, letting her shape our life to suit her needs. I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. What do I plan to do? I echoed, my voice cold and steady. I plan to make sure you understand the consequences of your choices. A flicker of fear crossed her face, but she quickly hid it, replacing it with a defiant smirk. What, you're going to divorce me? Go ahead. Maybe it's for the best. I stepped closer, locking my gaze on hers. I'm not just going to divorce you, Claire. I'm going to make sure you feel every ounce of pain you've put me through. You thought you could play with my trust, destroy everything we built, and just walk away. Think again. She swallowed, her confidence faltering. You wouldn't, you don't have it in you to be that cruel. Don't underestimate me, I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. You've already lost me, Claire. Now you're going to lose everything else too. The realization dawned on her, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She had never imagined that I would fight back, that I would take control. She had always seen me as the steady, dependable husband, the one who would bend over backward to keep her happy. But she had pushed me too far, and now, she was finally seeing the consequences. For the first time, she seemed genuinely shaken. She looked away, her shoulders slumping as the weight of what she had done began to sink in. I felt a strange satisfaction watching her realize the depth of her betrayal, the way it had shattered everything we had once shared. But I wasn't done. I had spent too long letting her dictate the terms, letting her take advantage of my trust. Now, it was my turn to set the rules. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and unwavering. You're going to pack your things and leave. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. This marriage, this life we had together, it's over. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. You're throwing me out. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace as the words left my mouth. Yes. You can go stay with him, for all I care. You wanted a life with him, so go live it. But you're not welcome here anymore. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe the words I had just said. And then, slowly, she nodded, accepting the reality of what she had done. Without another word, she turned and walked towards the bedroom to pack her things. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness, knowing that this was the end. The woman I had loved, the life we had shared, was gone. All that was left was a hollow shell, a reminder of the trust she had shattered. When she returned with her bag, she paused by the door, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. And with that, she walked out, leaving behind the broken pieces of our life, the remnants of a love that had been destroyed by lies and betrayal. The house was quiet again after she left, almost unnaturally so, like it was absorbing the shock of the confrontation. I felt a strange emptiness wash over me, the quiet after the storm. Claire was gone, and with her, the years of love, trust, and memories we had built together. I should have felt liberated, relieved that I had finally stood up for myself, but there was a hollowness in the victory, a sense of finality that left me unsettled. For days, I went through the motions, trying to adjust to a life without her. The emptiness in the house mirrored the emptiness I felt inside, a space that couldn't be filled. I buried myself in work, trying to distract myself from the memories that seemed to linger in every corner of our home. Every so often, I would catch myself thinking about her, wondering where she was, what she was doing. But I forced those thoughts away, telling myself it was over. Then, one evening, nearly a month after she had left, I received a letter in the mail. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, but the handwriting on the front was familiar. I hesitated before opening it, a strange sense of dread creeping over me. I took a deep breath, sliding the letter out of the envelope and unfolding it. Dear Liam, it began. By the time you read this, you'll probably hate me even more than you already do. But there are things you don't know, things I didn't tell you because I didn't know how. I never meant to hurt you, and I never wanted things to end the way they did. I hope you'll believe me when I say that. I stared at the words, feeling a mix of confusion and anger. What could she possibly say that would change anything now? I know you've probably pieced some of this together already, but I feel like I owe you the full truth. The man you saw me with, the man you think I left you for. He isn't who you think he is. He was never my lover, Liam. He was my private investigator. My breath caught as I read the words, my mind reeling. A private investigator. I read on, my heart pounding in my chest. I hired him months ago, after I started noticing strange things happening. Money missing from our accounts, transactions I didn't recognize, odd phone calls. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but the more I looked into it, the stranger things became. I didn't want to believe that you were involved, so I kept it to myself, hoping I was wrong. The room spun as I absorbed her words. Claire thought I was the one lying, that I was hiding something from her. He told me that there were discrepancies in your work records, nights where you said you were working late but weren't at the office. He said you were meeting someone else, that there was a possibility you were hiding money in another account. I didn't want to believe it, Liam. I told myself you would never do that you would never betray me. But the evidence was there, staring me in the face. A wave of nausea washed over me as I continued reading, the weight of her accusations pressing down on me. I felt anger boiling inside me, but I pushed it down, focusing on her words. When you started asking questions, I knew something was wrong. I tried to pull back, to distance myself because I didn't know how to confront you. And then, one night, I saw you tracking my phone, and I panicked. I thought you had found out what I was doing, that you were trying to catch me before I could expose you. I didn't know what else to do, so I let you believe that I was the one cheating. I thought maybe it would buy me some time to figure out the truth. I closed my eyes, struggling to process the confession. Claire had been investigating me, accusing me of the very things I thought she was guilty of. All the while, we had been locked in a silent, bitter battle of suspicion and mistrust. I'm sorry, Liam. I know I handled it badly, that I let things spiral out of control. I thought I was protecting myself, but in the end, I was only hurting you. I know you'll probably never forgive me for this, but I need you to understand why I did what I did. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought you had betrayed me. The letter ended with a simple line that felt like a punch to the gut, please, don't let this be the end of us. My hands shook as I folded the letter, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it all. Claire hadn't been unfaithful, she had been afraid, paranoid that I was the one hiding secrets. And in her desperation, she had let me believe she was guilty to protect herself. But as the shock wore off, another realization began to sink in. If Claire had thought I was lying, if she had hired someone to investigate me, that meant someone else had been manipulating us, sowing seeds of distrust and suspicion between us. I thought of the money that had disappeared, the odd phone calls, the gaps in my work records. Had someone else been playing us, someone who wanted to tear us apart? A sense of dread crept over me as I realized the implications. Claire and I had both fallen victim to someone else's scheme, a plan that had driven us apart, turned us against each other. And now, we were both left alone, isolated by a betrayal neither of us had committed. I glanced around the empty house, the memories of our life together feeling painfully hollow. We had both been so quick to assume the worst, so quick to believe in the lies and the manipulations that had been fed to us. And now, it was too late to fix what had been broken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the words in Claire's letter, by the realization of what we had lost. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if she could ever forgive me. But I knew that I couldn't let this be the end. I needed answers, needed to find out who had done this to us, who had twisted our lives into this cruel game. The next morning, I called Claire. When she answered, there was a long silence before she spoke. Liam, her voice was hesitant, wary. I got your letter, I said, my voice rough with emotion. I need to see you, Claire. We need to talk. There was another pause, and then, softly, she replied, I'll come over. As I waited for her to arrive, I thought of everything we had been through, of the love we had shared and the pain we had endured. I didn't know if we could rebuild what had been destroyed, if we could ever trust each other again. But I knew one thing, we both deserved the truth. And whatever it took, I was going to find it.